So to set the scene and to hear the extraordinary sound of Jean's French and Thierry's English, we're going to read the first two opening paragraphs. Rather, Jean is going to read the first two in French, and then Thierry is going to read his translation.
Les oiseaux sont fous qui traversent ma tête. Leurs ailes, un archipel de feu. Leurs chants, une colline chargée de ciel turbulent. Messagers de lumière certainement, qui font battre encore plus fort en moi le souvenir de ma peau, sujet d'un frôlement, lors de la dernière journée de classe. Mais comme toujours, je n'arrive pas à capter quelques lueurs de cette aubaine. Fixé sur la page, cet éclair qui se répand en un long frisson dans mes artères. Rature. Je fais royaume de papier froissé. Papa enfile sa robe colère pour nous remuer, nous travailler l'esprit. Bref, rappel de la fonction de sa bouche, mitrailleuse à l'affût du moindre créneau. Sang ouvert au feu, il tempête, vogue dans son orage, se livre corps entier à une violente rhapsodie, gueule comme on ne l'avait jamais engueulé lui-même, même dans son enfance. Si l'enfance, comme il croit, est l'âge du silence, il n'a pas eu d'enfance à proprement parler. La plus lointaine branche de son histoire qui nous parvienne, c'est son alliance avec la rue. Et comme dit l'ange du métal, on n'est plus un enfant quand seule la rue nous berce.
Thank you. Thierry, I'd like to invite you to read your lovely translation.
Sure, happy to. And thanks for having me. They're crazy, these birds crisscrossing my mind. Their wings an archipelago of fire. They're singing a rolling hill of turbulent skies. Messengers of light without a doubt, who cause to beat even louder inside of me the memory of the touch against my skin on the last day of class. But as usual, I still can't capture some small glimmer of this godsend. I still can't put to paper this flash of lightning that expands into a chill in my arteries. Words crossed out. I'm making a kingdom of crumpled papers. Papa put on his robe of anger to get us worked up, to mess with our heads. A brief reminder of the purpose of his mouth, a machine gun on the lookout for the slightest opportunity. Blood open to fire, he rants and raves, drifts in his own storm, gives his whole body over to a violent tirade, and yells like he has never been yelled at, even in his childhood. If childhood is the age of silence, as he believes, then he didn't have an actual childhood. The most elusive chapter of his story that comes to mind and is his alliance with the streets. And as the angel of metal says, you're not a child anymore when the streets are the only one cradling you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. So the story follows Tête Fêlée, cracked head, a young girl grappling it all at once with the ferocity of youth's love. She spends much of the book trying to write a letter to Moon, a silent interlocutor, the object of her desire. She says, I'm hot-blooded for this girl, and these are all Thierry's translations. I'm hot-blooded for this girl, and ever since I've been around her on this earth, I'm nothing more than a body strewn with chills. She's my moon. So there's that on the one hand. On the other hand, there's the extreme violence and suffering that we heard in this introduction as she grows up in the so-called city of God, the Cité de Dieu, a slum in Port-au-Prince in Haiti. She has an alcoholic mother, Orange Blossom, who earns a salary of flesh through prostitution, a sidewalk career. She has an abusive stepfather who's known to everyone as Papa, who works for the gruesome, we heard him too, Angel of Metal. So I'd like to start, Jean, with your decision, with the decision to choose this protagonist, her voice, its cadence, as well as her gender. Why tell this story ultimately from this perspective?
Alors, pour plusieurs raisons, parce que déjà, je me disais raconter depuis l'enfance, parce que c'est un roman autour de l'enfance d'abord, c'est-à-dire comment un enfant qui naît dans un milieu comme ça, qui est, on va dire, saturé de violence, comment elle arrive à grandir, comment elle arrive à devenir quelqu'un, à exister. Et une fille, parce que j'aime beaucoup inverser les représentations dans les récits que je construis. Du coup, je me suis dit, c'est intéressant de mettre cette jeune fille là où peut-être plus couramment on attendrait un petit garçon. Et voir comment ça peut infuser juste l'esprit des lecteurs et lectrices sans être dans quelque chose de frontal, mais juste proposer une autre représentation. Et, et comme c'est un...
Okay, I chose this protagonist for several reasons. First, I chose to place the story from the point of view of a child because this is first and foremost a story about childhood. And I wanted to show how a child is born in this particular context, which is saturated with violence, and how that child can grow up to become someone and to exist in this context. And the second thing is that I wanted to show a girl because I like turning representations upside down in the stories that I tell. And so I wanted to place a girl where naturally you might expect a boy and just let the reader play with this idea. I didn't want to impose it, but I wanted to suggest it and let the reader play with it.
Thank you. And I think this idea of turning things upside down, there's also the decision to make the object of her desire female. So we might expect also that not only might the protagonist have been male, but that since she is a female, we kind of expect that she is writing to a young boy. And indeed, about halfway through, a character asks Tête Fellée, Cracked Head, if she's writing letters to a boyfriend, and she says, no, it's not a boyfriend. Can you talk about this decision to write and render the sensuous and achingly beautiful love and sex between young women?
C'est toujours la question des représentations. C'est pourquoi j'en ai pas fait vraiment un sujet dans le livre, parce que je pense qu'on vit dans une société qui est très hétéronormée et c'est en partie à cause des récits qu'on nous raconte, qu'on nous transmet, qui ont ces biais hétéronormés et du coup qui vont façonner notre manière de voir le monde, de penser. Et je pense, pour les déconstruire, on peut le faire aussi en donnant juste d'autres représentations dans lesquelles les gens entrent. Donc pas forcément toujours en les fustigeant, mais en proposant une autre perspective. Et moi, j'ai envie d'écrire le monde tel que je l'envisage, tel que j'aimerais qu'il soit. Donc, c'est pour ça que j'en ai pas fait un sujet dans le livre. Je raconte juste une histoire d'amour, tout comme si c'était une histoire d'amour hétérosexuel. On ne poserait pas la question parce qu'on a l'habitude de les lire assez couramment. Et aussi parce que je trouve que, bon, c'est intéressant de le faire aussi, mais je trouve que souvent, les histoires d'amour homosexuels que je lis, on pose souvent la difficulté d'être homosexuel dans une société. Et je pense que Enfin, on peut les raconter aussi, ces histoires, sans poser toujours cette difficulté-là, même si elle existe, mais juste raconter l'histoire d'amour, en fait. Donc voilà. Désolé.
So it's still the question of representations. I just wanted to show this without making it the topic or the issue, because we live in a society full of norms and biases about heterosexual love, and this dictates the world as we see it and as we build it. And there's a way of changing that when you write different representations, when you give other representations to people through stories that you tell, without judging them, but just by giving them other perspectives. I simply write the world as I want it to be. And also, I think that when you read a love story between a boy and a girl, you don't ask the question, you don't ask why a boy and a girl. And that's another reason why I chose to have a non-heterosexual love story. And also, I tend to say that when you read a story, a homosexual story, the one thing that's put forward is the difficulty of living that relationship. And I wanted to simply tell a love story without the difficulties, even if it is there, but I didn't want that to be the focus of it.
And it's true that the way that you capture, I think the sex is so beautiful. So I wanted to read, and this is again the translation, but these two moments, she's writing this letter. So she says, my mouth adorned with light since its stroll on your body. I want you in my arms and in my inner lines. I want you on my path. This is the letter at the end. It's very sexual. A constant fire roams inside me, and each morning, like dawn rising behind the mountains, a shivering current unfolds between my legs. I come. Thierry, let's go to you, because you had the enormous challenge and exciting challenge, I would say, of capturing this young female voice in your translation. Can you tell us about your approach? How did you catch the cadences of this voice? And also, rather than focusing on her gender and her sexual orientation, can we also talk about her youth? Because you observed in our conversation that there was something about her kind of naive and young perspective on the world and the trauma around her that struck you.
Yeah, I mean, when I was first sort of given an excerpt of the book for consideration for translation, so I hadn't read the whole text, so I was unaware in the beginning that I was actually translating a female voice. I assumed that the protagonist was a young boy. So it wasn't much later when I actually got into the book, because I was translating it, that I don't exactly remember where in the book it was that you learned that this is a young girl. Actually, I think I might remember now, but it's one of the sort of more climactic scenes early on in the book. Learn that she's a young woman. So I had to go back and reread it at that point, because I realized that I was reading this was a young girl's voice, very young girl's voice, very strong voice. She's a very strong character who's growing up in a world that's sort of precarious, but she's sort of making do with what she has. But I don't think I treated that, sort of knowing that, I don't think I treated the text sort of any differently. I think it just it was useful, I think, for me to have that picture in my head about sort of who this character was. But she's capable, I think, of doing anything that I think a male character would have been able to. So I don't necessarily know if that it changed my approach, I mean, it didn't really change my approach in terms of how it translated, the text. And as Jean was saying, I think there is sort of a normalization, I think, of, through these, scenes or sort of intimate scenes. There is sort of a normalization about these types of relationships, and it made it sort of. I don't think it made the task any more difficult. I think it just made it quite actually enjoyable to sort of see this sort of unfolding on the page, and the fact that, as Jean said, he wasn't sort of harping on the fact that this was a homosexual relationship. That I think for me as a translator, it made it sort of easier, because he's really, I think, driving home that message that this is just normal behavior.
And then in terms of her youth, can you talk about how her youthful perspective, as you said in our conversation, maybe highlighted things that we wouldn't normally expect to observe or learn in traumatic moments?
Yeah, I mean, she, is a young girl who growing up real fast because of the position she's been in, and what she does outside of school, the activities she's involved with, the lifestyle. So she noticed, I think there's a maturity there. She notices things that you wouldn't necessarily, that most 15-year-olds, I don't think would notice. So she's very mature. I think her perspective, especially on education, there's a passage in the text where she's she's sort of critiquing schooling and education and its purpose. That really stood out for me, because it just showed the sort of the depth of just sort of her understanding about the reality sort of on the ground or behind the scenes. So she's very, very mature. And yeah, it was going to be one of the passages I was going to read later on, but I think I chose another one. But that particular scene where she's really going in on the educational system was very sort of revealing of her maturity.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to anything?
Je pense que c'était très juste. Merci Thierry. Oui, peut-être juste ajouter que effectivement, Tête Fêlée, c'est une figure, même si c'est une enfant, mais c'est une figure, c'est-à-dire déjà par tout ce qu'elle subit, elle arrive à faire des choses qui normalement reflètent pas son âge forcément, parce qu'elle doit répondre à des questions brûlantes de vie et de mort tout le temps. Donc, elle grandit par ça. Mais aussi, comme je dis, c'est une figure, c'est-à-dire qui prend en charge beaucoup de choses qui ne sont pas forcément qu'à elle. Sa voix est celle de son quartier, sa voix est celle de sa ville, son pays. Du coup, ça prend une dimension qui dépasse, je veux dire, le degré physique du personnage. Voilà, c'est une voix.
Thanks, Thierry, for what you said. I'd just like to add something on Cracked Head. She is a child, but she also becomes more than a character. She becomes a symbol, a voice, because she's capable of doing things that a child her age wouldn't normally do, simply because she has to go through these life and death questions day in, day out, and she grows up through those questions. And the other thing is that she takes on issues that are not just her own. She's also the voice of a neighborhood. She's the voice of a city. She's the voice of a country. So she's not just a character, she's a voice.
Thank you. I want to talk about the language, because what's so striking both in the French and the English is the poetry and the lyricism of the text. And I think in many ways, Cracked Head, Tête Fêlé's longing for Moon, this beloved, writing to Moon, creates a kind of dreamlike space in which she takes refuge from this brutal reality of her life. She says in the book, she opens a path for me. In an interview, Jean described this as a kind of window. As the window opens before her, it flows and mixes with the poverty and cruelty and corruption of the life around her. And Jean has said previously, I mean, just right now, that he first of all wanted to write a love story. And I think through this guiding intention, the descriptions of the intention to write the love story transform, and Terry and I were talking about this yesterday, they transform horror into beauty and violence into tenderness. And even in the most violent descriptions, we hear beauty and we see beauty. So I wanted to read a paragraph that really struck me in this regard. Here we are, rowing debris towards the red carpets, the violent red of gunshots, the red of neighborhoods condemned to savor their destitution, eternal odyssey of blood. Dizziness rises to the surface. Here we are, another sight of tears, another rain of fractures. How do you think about poetry, Jean, its cadences, its rhythms, its freedoms in relation to violence?
Et je pense que la poésie, quand j'écris, je ne l'envisage pas simplement ou même pas du tout comme un ornement, c'est-à-dire c'est pas une poignée de fleurs que je viens déposer sur la boue pour la cacher, mais il faut que la poésie aille au fond même de cette boue, il faut que la poésie embrasse cette boue pour mieux la montrer. Du coup, en écrivant sur des situations aussi violentes, je pense que la poésie m'a aidé à raconter cette violence. Pas seulement en créant à côté une fenêtre, mais aller déterrer cette violence, mais en tout cas, la poésie me permet de l'amener à vous, de faire en sorte que ça ne soit pas juste voilà, un tas de choses crues jetées à la face du monde, mais que ça ait un sens. La poésie m'aide à trouver ce sens-là par le langage, puisque je dois, en tout cas, j'essaye de trouver une justesse dans la manière de les dire, qui fait que ça peut percuter et du coup aller réveiller quelqu'un sur telle réalité. Et effectivement, il y a beaucoup d'allers-retours, même si parfois je décris des scènes d'amour ou même des instants de tendresse qu'elle a, Tête Fêlée, et elle part dans son monologue, mais on retrouve des images de la violence même dans cet endroit-là. Je pense à un moment où elle parle, par exemple, de elle et la fille dont elle est amoureuse, en se rappelant d'un moment de tendresse qu'elles ont eu. Et elle dit, nous étions, toi et moi, une balle et un corps dans la nuit de Port-au-Prince, pour décrire leur proximité, enfin leur moment de tendresse. Donc pour moi, ça, par exemple, c'est un exemple de ce type d'image que je cherche, ou en même temps, Sorry. Ou en même temps, en fait, tout ça fait partie de la vie, c'est-à-dire la violence, la tendresse, l'amour. Et donc, trouver comment dans un melting pot, on peut parler de tout ça, parce que tout ça fait partie de la vie que je décris.
When I write, I don't see poetry like a simple decoration that I'd add to the writing. I don't see poetry as a bunch of flowers that I'd just put on mud to try and hide it. I think that poetry has to go inside of the mud to better show it. And when I write violent situations, I think that poetry helps me show that better, not just because it's a shelter or a window through which to see it, but because it helps me unearth the violence. It helps me bring it to the reader in a way that doesn't bring it forward in a raw and untidy way, but in a way that has meaning for me through the language. I have to find a way of saying things that sound right, and poetry helps me say these things in the way that's going to strike the reader and that's maybe going to open him up to this reality. And also, you were talking about the alternation between violence and tenderness. And I would say that you also find violence in the tender moments. I'm thinking of a moment in particular where the protagonist is thinking of the girl that she loves, and she's remembering one of those moments that they had together. So it's a tender moment. And I say, and here I paraphrase, we were like one bullet and one body in the night. And this is an example of the images that I try and find, because I think that all these themes are part of life. And it's a melting pot that I need to express this life because it's all part of it.
Thierry, this was your observation yesterday, this slippage between horror and beauty, violence and tenderness. Would you like to add any other images that struck you, or I suppose general thoughts about this point?
Yeah, sure. You know, Jean's poetry it adds layer to the text. You know, it's not reductive. It's, you know, it doesn't lessen the impact of the ugly and the violent, but it enriches it. You know, and I found it to be an invitation to sort of reimagine or to face, you know, that which we feel is ugly and violent in an alternative way. You know, there's one scene where someone I think is killed and falls to the ground, but, you know, they don't crash to the ground, but they embrace the ground. You know, so there's that tenderness, you know, even in this sort of tragic moment, there's a tenderness to it. And I think, as Jean was saying, there's you know, there's tenderness, there's love, and, you know, there are all these beautiful things, like even in the tragic and in the things that we fear. Yeah, I think that stood out for me, as someone who doesn't write poetry, but you know, the images and the comparisons and the poetry, they all land somewhere that's very unexpected, but revealing for both the reader, but also the story.
Thank you. We're talking a lot about poetry, but of course you also write theatre. How do you think that your experience on the stage, surrounded by young children currently, but as a playwright, has informed your prose?
Ouais, pour moi, la base, la matière première de mon travail, c'est la poésie. Il n'y a pas de doute. Mais autour de ça, gravitent plein d'autres formes. Et donc, que parfois, je vais utiliser ou embrasser. Et parce que je crois que la poésie donne une sorte de force au langage qui fait que quand ça va prendre en charge une histoire, elle va élever l'histoire, elle va la rendre encore plus forte. Donc le théâtre ou le roman, j'ai été vers ces genres littéraire parce qu'il y a l'endroit de l'histoire qui m'intéresse aussi. Mais du coup, la poésie n'est jamais mise de côté. Et par exemple, dans le roman, c'est peut-être l'endroit où, ouais, dans Soleil à coude, c'est peut-être l'endroit où on peut trouver tous ces écartèlements que j'ai dans l'écriture, mais pas fait de manière, comment dire, systématique. C'est-à-dire, je ne me dis pas, je vais faire un roman où je mets des codes du théâtre et de la poésie. C'est vraiment l'idée, je raconte une histoire et je mets au service de cette histoire-là une langue que j'espère être singulière dans la manière d'agencer les choses. Et ouais, des mécanismes de narration qui ne sont pas des choses que je maîtrise d'avance, mais que j'expérimente dans l'écriture et qui donnent une forme comme celle-ci. Ouais, je le théorise pas avant de le faire. C'est dans l'expérience de l'écriture. D'ailleurs, je n'avais pas prévu d'écrire un roman au départ. Hein. Pareil pour le théâtre. C'est toujours arrivé dans l'expérimentation de quelque chose dans l'écriture et ça dérive ouais, vers une forme et on finit par mettre un label dessus. Donc, c'est roman.
Poetry is at the heart of everything that I write. And around it, there are other forms that I use or embrace. I use poetry because I think that it adds strength to the language. And I think that whatever form it ends up in, poetry elevates the story that I'm telling. So I've moved to theatre and to novels because I also like telling stories, but I never put poetry aside. And I think that it's in writing a novel that I find all the different forms that I like. But I don't make it a systematic exercise. I never say, okay, so I'm going to write a novel in which I'm going to put elements of play and elements of poetry. It's a story for which I try to find a language which is singular and a story in which I will use mechanisms and voices that are going to give a form to that story. I don't theorize, I don't think about what I'm going to write before I write it. I tend to experiment and then see where it goes. And in fact, I hadn't intended to write a novel initially. And it's the same with theatre. It never starts as a fixed idea. It starts with an experiment and then it leads to a form, and that form ends up being put under a label, a name, and here it's a novel.
Why do you think this particular story ended up as a novel, as your first novel?
Parce que quand j'ai commencé, j'avais pas l'histoire en tête exactement. Ça s'est construit au fur et à mesure. D'ailleurs, au départ, c'était pas Tête Fêlée. J'ai pas commencé avec Tête Fêlée comme personnage, mais elle est devenue le personnage principal. Mais bon, elle est arrivée très vite, mais quand même, j'ai commencé avec le personnage de papa. Et j'avais commencé par une description de ce personnage et la petite fille est arrivée et je sais pas, j'ai suivi sa voix. Comme l'histoire se déployait, un personnage en amenait un autre, une situation en amenait un autre. Et du coup, je me rendais compte que dans ce qui se racontait, il y avait plein d'enjeux à cerner. C'est comme, ok, je vois cette histoire d'amour qui arrive, mais elle se passe dans un bidonville à Port-au-Prince. Bah, il faut raconter cet environnement, il faut raconter les violences qui entourent cette histoire d'amour et donc pour déployer toutes ces choses, voilà, c'est devenu une histoire au long cours par la force des choses, par la force des personnages, des situations. Et quand peut-être je peux continuer. Et quand désolé. Et quand j'ai envoyé ça à une maison d'édition, donc à Actes Sud, c'est le premier endroit où on avait lu le manuscrit du coup. Et les premiers retours que j'ai eus, c'était justement pour pousser, en tout cas trouver de la précision dans la narration, mais que la langue, elle était là, mais il fallait pousser ce truc de la narration dont les bases étaient là. Et donc, j'ai repris le texte dans ce sens-là aussi pour préciser des choses. Après, jusqu'à présent, il y a des gens qui me disent pour eux, c'est un monologue, c'est pas forcément un roman. Voilà. Et moi, ça me dérange pas du tout parce que ça soit un roman ou autre chose, c'est un texte qui raconte quelque chose et qui a une langue. C'est le plus important pour moi.
So it didn't actually start as a story. It became one gradually. It didn't even start with Cracked Head. She wasn't the main protagonist. I actually started with the character of Papa. It started with a description of him, and then entered the little girl, and I followed her voice. And then one character led to another, and one situation led to another. And as the story was unfolding, I realized that there was lots of at stake, and I started seeing this love story coming, and so I realized that it was going to have to take place within the slums of Port-au-Prince, and so I realized that I would have to tell those slums, and I'd have to talk about the violence around the love story, and to let that unfold, it had to become a long story because of all those characters, because of all those situations. And when I sent the text to the first publishing house, which was Actes Sud, the feedback I got was to push for more precision. So I had the voice, but they wanted me to make things more specific. And that's what I did. So some people come to me and say that to them, it's not actually a novel, but it's more a monologue. And I don't mind what it is. It's a text which is telling something with a specific language, and that's the most important thing to me.
Fantastic. So let's go now, before we turn to your questions, to the language. I'll just have you read this passage, Jean, and then we'll go to Thierry. Thierry, I think in the interest of time, we'll start from Mon enfance, so my childhood, just below where you selected.
Mon enfance, troupeau d'aiguilles dans la chair de mon âge, Triste quartier, ô ma cité de Dieu, je te maudis pour mes rêves dressés dans la foudre. La violence coule, grammaire sauvage. J'en ai bu et elle a dévoré ma langue. J'aimais bien mon innocence, l'aime bien encore. J'ai beau lutter contre la bête qui me remplit, j'ai promis de la tendresse à mes mains, mais le fer a eu raison de moi. La violence a conquis mes lignes blanches, sale chronique blessant ma voix. Est-ce ainsi que la solitude m'attrape? Est-ce ainsi que la nuit m'appelle? J'entends le chant sauvage, un refrain qui m'est familier. Tu seras seul. Tu seras seul dans la grande nuit. M'efforcer d'enjamber le temps à coups de pas précoces, me détruire cruellement, je m'empoisonne pour être quelqu'un au milieu de ces bêtes qui se mentent à elles-mêmes au sujet de leur nature. Fuir ce monde mal parti, échapper à ces plaies qui marquent les interstices du rêve, être au moins un cri dans l'abattoir. Je ne périrai pas dans ce sanglant contrat des hommes.
Merci. Thierry.
My childhood, a herd of needles in the flesh of my lifetime. Miserable neighborhood. Oh, my city of God, I curse you for my dreams drawn up in lightning. The violence flows, savage grammar. I've drunk some, and she devoured my tongue. I loved my innocence. I still love her. I may fight against the beast that fills me. I promised my hands tenderness, but the iron got the best of me. Violence has conquered my white lines, a dirty history wounding my voice. Is this how loneliness grabs me? Is this how night calls me? I hear the wild song, a chorus that is familiar to me. You'll be alone. You'll be alone in the great night. To strive to straddle time with precocious steps and destroy who I'm with cruelty. I use poison to become one of these beasts who lie to themselves about their nature. To flee this world that's not looking good, escape these wounds that make the interstices of the dream, to be at least a cry in the slaughterhouse. I won't perish in this bloody contract of mankind.
Thank you. Can we have a huge round of applause, please, for Jean and Thierry? Fantastic. So you have about 15 minutes for your questions. So if you have any questions for either Thierry or Jean, please do not hesitate. Yes.
Just what age did you start writing, and what was the first thing that you wrote? Was it something that kind of you had to do?
J'avais 11, 12 ans, ouais, 11 ans, 12 ans. C'est vrai, enfin, je n'ai pas commencé à écrire Solaire.
Papoak Sud.
Non, en fait, c'est par le rap que je suis venu à l'écriture. Donc, ouais, à cet âge-là, j'ai commencé à écouter du rap et j'étais fasciné par cette musique et c'est là que ça a basculé. C'est-à-dire, je voyais des jeunes qui venaient de quartiers populaires comme moi à Port-au-Prince et qui avaient pris cette musique qui, à la base, n'est pas souvent très bien représentée, en tout cas un peu discriminée comme forme artistique, et qui ont pris ça, qui ont imposé leur voix à la société. C'est-à-dire, même si on n'était pas forcément fan d'eux, mais on ne pouvait plus ignorer leur existence. Et moi, ça m'a percuté. Et je voyais mon image du coup à travers eux. Et c'est comme ça que j'ai commencé à écrire des petits textes. Bon, alors, c'était un ramassis de rimes très ennuyantes, je vous assure. Mais ça a déclenché le geste chez moi. Je partageais avec mes amis dans le quartier, à l'école. Et il y a des profs qui vont me faire découvrir des livres. Et ça m'a ouvert une autre porte. Mais pour moi, c'était complémentaire à ce bagage-là que j'avais acquis de la musique rap du coup. D'ailleurs, c'est pourquoi jusqu'à présent, c'est toujours une double référence que je mets toujours en avant, que je tiens à mettre en avant. Par exemple, dans Soleil à coudre, c'est pas pour rien que j'ai mis une citation de Tupac Shakur pour commencer le livre. Il y a plein d'auteurs qui ont écrit des livres que j'aime bien, mais pour moi, ça a un autre sens que de citer un rappeur à l'entrée d'un livre. Ou même à l'intérieur, on croise un livre de Romain Gary qui côtoie un disque de Kendrick Lamar. Parce que c'est ces deux choses-là qui m'ont formé, c'est la musique, c'est les livres. Et donc, voilà, c'est comme ça que j'ai fait mon chemin.
So I started when I was 11 or 12, and I didn't start with this, obviously. No, I started with rap music. I started listening to that music and I was absolutely fascinated, and that's what got me going. I saw all these youngsters listening to that music, and it really was a type of music that was discriminated against as a form of art, and yet they managed to impose their voice to the world in a way that even if you didn't like that music, you could no longer ignore it. And I found that absolutely fascinating, and that's when I started writing texts. So it was a series of incredibly boring rhymes, but it got me started, and I started sharing this with my friends and at school. And then once I was at school, some teachers actually made me discover books, but that opened another door, and that was always in addition to this initial thing of rap music. And that's why I always have a dual reference today, and that's why I chose to refer to Tupac before the start of the novel. That's why in the novel you'll see Romain Gary, an author, next to Kendrick Lamar, just because these are my references, and that's how I started writing.
Thank you.
Yes. Hi, I'll say it in English, but you said that when you turned in your manuscript, the publisher was like, you need to be more specific. Could you share with us what you need to be more specific on?
Alors, c'était quoi exactement? Mais enfin, j'ai pas forcément de détails là, mais je me souviens que l'éditrice qui a repéré mon texte, elle m'a dit, c'était le premier mail que j'ai reçu, elle m'a dit qu'elle est convaincue par la langue, que ouais, c'est ça qui fait qu'elle est intéressée à ce manuscrit. Les retours qu'elle avait sur l'histoire, c'était des choses parfois qui n'étaient pas assez cohérentes, ou bien soit tel aspect qui n'était pas assez développé, ou qui... Ouais, c'était une question de cohérence sur l'ensemble. Et du coup, il fallait, oui, préciser ces ces choses-là. Mais je me souviens, j'avais pris, pour retravailler, j'ai pris beaucoup de temps, bon, parce que je faisais autre chose par ailleurs, mais ça avait aussi le temps de maturer autrement dans ma tête. Et donc, en reprenant le texte, j'ai découvert autre chose aussi que désormais je voulais remanier. Donc oui, ça a été un travail de précision sur l'ensemble, en fait. Mais c'était pas forcément en me disant il faut pas faire comme ça, il faut faire comme ça, il faut pas aller là, il faut aller là. Je pense que si c'était le cas, j'aurais pas forcément travaillé avec Actes Sud, oui, ou cette éditrice. Parce que pour moi, ce qui était important, c'est qu'elle avait compris ce que je voulais faire et où je voulais aller. Et elle m'a aidé à aller vers là avec plus de justesse, plus de précision. C'était ça.
I don't think she asked me to be specific on details in particular. I remember that the woman who read me and who first said that she was interested in my text, the initial email that she sent said that she was convinced by the language, and that's what got her interested in my text. But the feedback that she gave on the story is that it lacked coherence as a whole, and that certain aspects needed to be developed just to add meaning to the actual story. So when I started rewriting, I actually took my time. I was doing other stuff at the same time, and that actually helped me think it over. And when I reread what I'd written, I read my text with new eyes. So I was asked to be more specific overall. She didn't ever say, you shouldn't go here, you should go there, you shouldn't do this, you should do that. If she'd done that, I probably wouldn't have ended up working with her. The reason why I did was because she'd understood what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I actually think that she helped me do that in a way that sounded right for me.
Thank you. Yes.
Are there any local Haitian artists that you admire or who influenced how you developed this product, how you developed your formed the text? I'm not talking about foreign Haitian writers, but I'm talking about local Haitian writers who had some influence in how you formulated your development of the book.
Alors, il y a beaucoup d'artistes, beaucoup d'auteurs, autrices. Dans les premiers que j'ai lus et qui m'ont... je pense que vous parlez de personnes que j'ai lues, pas forcément... Ouais, ok. Jacques-Stéphane Alexis. Bon, lui, il a passé beaucoup de temps à l'étranger, mais il revenait toujours en Haïti et il était très impliqué politiquement. Et justement, beaucoup d'auteurs qui m'ont marqué, qui m'ont fait avancer, c'est très souvent... ils ont très souvent un propos politique et une langue, une manière de porter ce propos politique qui est belle et qui est percutante. Donc, Jacques-Stéphane Alexis. ou encore Franck Etienne. Franck Etienne, un écrivain haïtien. C'est un des rares d'ailleurs qui est pas à l'étranger, qui est toujours resté dans le pays. Je pense côté musique, je parlais tout à l'heure, il y a deux groupes qui m'ont marqué à cette époque en Haïti. Barricade Crew et Rock Femme. Voilà, deux groupes de rap. Qu'est-ce que je pourrais citer encore? Marie Furthner, c'est une écrivaine haïtienne qu'il faut absolument lire. Que j'ai beaucoup aimé aussi. Bon, je vais peut-être pas en citer énormément, mais en tout cas, à chaque fois, le lien entre ces écrivains ou ces artistes, c'est souvent qui dit des choses assez fortes sur la société. Voilà, on peut sentir un certain engagement politique et en même temps qui ne font pas du track, enfin qui ont une forme artistique touchante et percutante pour le faire.
So artists that I've read, I could mention Jacques-Stéphane Alexis, who lives abroad, but who goes back to Haiti regularly and who was very politically involved. And I'd have to say that most of the artists that have influenced me, that have helped me move forward, are artists who have strong political ideas and whose language carry these messages in a really powerful way. Franck Etienne, who's one of the few who still lives there, who doesn't live abroad. Two rap groups that really influenced me at the time and whom I listened to quite a lot.
Yeah, Barricade Crew, Rock Femme.
There you go. Then Marie Furthner, you have to read her. She's wonderful. And what I could mention many more, but what they all have in common is that they have strong messages on society. They're committed politically, and they have the art with which they do this is both moving and really striking, and that's what I like about them.
This is great because that actually kind of leads me into a final question that I wanted to ask you in the interest of time. So you mentioned that the protagonist is in some ways a figure. She represents a neighborhood, a country, and she somehow overcomes the physical body of her character. And rather than in this book wade, as you say, into the kind of historical, political, social particularities of the country, you do in some ways hover, I would say, at the level of the symbolic, of the metaphor. So we encounter characters like the politician, capital P, politician. At one point, the protagonist, and this gets to a point that Thierry was making about education, says, I don't give a shit about this history class, which conveys morals instead of memory. You yourself engage politically in the book, but it's oblique. Can you talk about this more oblique approach?
Je ne pense pas que c'est indirect comme méthode. C'est juste, c'est différent de certaines actions politiques qu'on peut poser sur le terrain. C'est différent. Mais la littérature, pour moi, c'est juste que ça peut prendre plus de temps pour agir. Mais pour moi, c'est l'enfance ça peut être l'enfance de nos actions. C'est-à-dire, moi, j'en suis un témoignage. J'ai été construit, formé politiquement par ça. Ma conscience par rapport à ce qui se passe autour de moi, j'ai pu comprendre les réalités qui m'entourent parce que j'ai lu des choses qui m'ont amené là, qui m'ont amené à cette conscience politique. Et ça, c'est déjà un impact fort. Et c'est parce que ça s'opère dans l'esprit. Et c'est là que tout commence pour pouvoir envisager des actions, pour pouvoir envisager une transformation de la société. Par ailleurs, moi, comme citoyen, c'est pas un endroit où, où je viens me cacher pour ne pas poser d'autres actions politiques. Parce que je pense que je suis citoyen avant d'être écrivain. Donc, je ne fais que prolonger ce geste citoyen à travers un livre qui c'est un autre travail. Et par rapport à Haïti, par rapport à Haïti, aborder ces questions-là, pour moi, c'est inévitable dans ce que j'écris parce que je viens de là, je viens de ces lieux et je ne peux pas avancer sans eux. Je ne peux pas, je ne peux pas avancer sans eux. Il faut raconter ces histoires, ça commence par là pour pouvoir les changer aussi. Il faut nommer les choses, il faut éveiller la conscience des gens sur ces réalités qui se passent autour d'eux et espérer parce qu'il n'y a qu'en s'engageant qu'on peut sortir de ces situations. Donc, pour moi, c'est un outil, la littérature, qui peut être au service de ces causes-là, oui.
I'd say that writing in this particular way is a method that's different from field action. Literature might take more time to get people to act, but I'd say that it's also, in a way, the childhood of our actions. Personally, I grew up through precisely that. It's through the books that I read and that explained my realities that I forged my political consciousness. So I think that literature has a strong impact because it has to start in the mind before it becomes an act and before it can transform society. And as a citizen, I'd say that my writing isn't a way of hiding from more direct actions, but it's an act. It is a political act to write. And as for Haiti and the things that I mention in the book, I have to talk about these things. It's necessary because that's where I come from. And I literally can't move forward without those situations, because I think that you have to name these things before any change can occur. And we have to do this in order to raise awareness, hoping, because committing is the only way to make those things go away. And to me, literature is a tool that helps me achieve that.